What's up, guys? Kawasaki Brad here. Today we're going to be upgrading the clutch springs on my Z125 Pro, also known as Snot Rocket. If you've been watching the other videos, we're doing lots of wheelies with the ice studs, the clutch ups. They're making the clutch pretty soft. So if you need a clutch replacement or if you just need to be upgrading to the heavy duty clutch springs, which consequently are also sold on my website, stay tuned. We're going to get this apart, show you how to put them in. Now the first thing we need to remove is the clutch cable, so let's pull that little rubber boot back, keeps all the sand and grit from getting in there, and take your two 12mm wrenches and loosen off the lock nut. Spin that one all the way off the end, the one on the left hand side, because we're going to end up pulling that through its little clip. Now there's two ways to go about doing this. You can loosen it off on your clutch perch side. I prefer to just grab a crescent wrench and torque it over until you can release the cable end out of that little slot. And now we should be able to pull the clutch cable right through that bracket and set it off to the side where it's not going to be in our way. And we're lucky enough in this case we don't need to remove any body work. You just grab that little black plastic piece and give it a little pull and it pops out of the way. And then some needle nose pliers on the brake light spring to release that. Last, we're going to undo the two bolts holding on the rear set or foot peg. I get lazy sometimes, so I like to just spin them out. And now you can see the last spring, which is hooked onto our brake pedal, simply pops off of that little pin up top there, and now you can move the whole thing out of your way. Then you can grab your 8mm and start taking out all 9 of the clutch cover bolts. None of the other ones need to come out, just those 9. Just crack them all with a ratchet, and then again I like to get lazy and spin them out with the drill. And don't forget to remove that little wire in its little clips on the side, on the right hand side there. With a little bit of persuasion, it'll come off. The longer it's been on there and the older your bike is, the harder it is for this to come off. It does come eventually. Make sure you still have those two little dowels. If they are not there, now's the time to find them. And then we pop our bearing assembly out right on the center of the clutch nut and start spinning off all 6 of the 8mm. These go right over top of our clutch springs. So be careful with the last one. You want to hold it on there flat so it's not being pushed crooked just as you're loosening the last only bolt that's still holding it on. Let's get those old springs out of there. And put the new springs in. So notice how this plate is not the same on both sides. There's one side that's completely smooth and the other side has steps in it. The step side faces out. So then I realized that the stock bolts that were holding this plate on there aren't quite long enough to deal with the extra length on the heavy-duty springs. My solution to this is pretty simple, and that is to use a longer bolt. However, that bolt is now too long to actually leave in there and use. So, just use it for assembly. I have them a completely different color, a completely different head, to try and make it as hard as possible to forget about them. Back to putting the plate on, with the step side out and the smooth side in. Press it up against the springs, make sure they're all sitting kind of flat, and use one of those extra long assembly bolts to get it started. As you're threading those in, it's very important that they go in equally and that plate stays flat. This is what it should look like when those temporary bolts are in place. With our assembly aid bolts holding everything together, we can put in the 4 2 top 2 bottom of the actual stock proper length, proper size bolts. And we can spin them in until they stop or just kind of snug up a little bit. Now it's time to remove those assembly aid bolts. I do recommend you keep those bolts, maybe throw them in a baggie with your old clutch springs. They're going to help out a lot the next time you do clutch work. Once they're out, we put the remaining 2 factory bolts back in and once again snug them up. So here I am spinning them all in, trying to keep it equal, right to the point where they seat. I'm not actually torquing them, just kind of tightening them up until they stop. Our magic number here, according to the factory service manual, is 44 inch-pounds. Now I think that is way too light. I personally set mine at 70. You do whatever it is that makes you feel comfortable, but I recommend putting them in at 70. Do a quick round of double checks. Now we're ready for our bearing insert. Whenever these do come apart in separate pieces, I always like to disassemble them before I try push them in. They're always a little bit tricky to push in. You've got to rock them back and forth and get them lined up just perfect. The less pieces while you're trying to do that, the better. So it took me a little while to figure out what was wrong with this next part, so hopefully I can point this out and save you some time. See how the springs are encroaching on the inside of the hole just ever so slightly there? I had to go around with my thumb and push them towards the outside. They were stopping this bearing insert from actually going in. So as I was saying, these can be tricky at the best of times. I've wiped this off, I've got it covered in assembly lube, and you still just gotta press and wiggle and line it up as best you can and hope for the best and squeeze on it. Hope you get that really satisfying click at the end. That bearing has a fairly hard job in there, and we just made it harder with heavier clutch springs, so I figured the least I can do is put some assembly lube in there before we press them back in and put them to work. And this is similar in frustration to that last piece we put in. Precision machine, exact fit, has to be lined up just right, kind of just wiggle and push. Now for the clutch cover, home stretch. Make sure your gasket is fine, doesn't have any chunks missing out of it, and look for that little clutch engagement nub. It likes to fall out sometimes. Make sure it's still there, make sure it's clean, make sure there's oil on it. And as long as you didn't lose any of those dowels we talked about not losing earlier, this should slide on fairly easy, fairly straight. Don't be afraid to use a little bit of persuasion if necessary. Back to those 9 clutch cover bolts, put some Loctite on them, thread them in. Make sure you crisscross pattern, don't tighten them up in a circle or anything like that. Tighten them up kind of like you would a tire. Once again, I think the factory service manual has these recommended at 44-48 inch-pounds, and once again mine is set at 70. By all means, do whatever you want, whatever makes you feel comfortable, but yeah, mine's 70. Alright, home stretch. Hook that spring back on for your brake pedal. Put some Loctite on the rear set bolts and thread them in. And torque them down. We'll give that plastic piece a little push, get them back in the grommet. And we'll grab that little spring that turns our brake light on and hook them back up. Now we'll remount the clutch cable. Don't forget to adjust your free play when all of this is said and done. I do have clutch and throttle cable free play covered in another video, so if you have any questions about that, now would be a great time to head over to the Kawasaki Brad channel and check them out. Please don't forget to put oil back in your bike. If you do forget, I promise it's going to wreck your whole day. So as you can probably tell by the before and the after, there's absolutely no bling associated with this mod. It is all performance. If you have done it, I sure would like to hear from you. Let me know how it's working. If there's something I missed or something you feel I didn't explain properly, please let me know in the comments below. I read those almost daily and I will get back to you. Other than that, I hope you all had fun, and in the meantime, ride it like you're sponsored. Now you may be asking yourself, why do I need stiffer clutch springs? And not sure if you've ever had one of these clutch baskets apart. This is not out of the Z125 Pro, this is out of my ZX10. You're going to have a bunch of steels and a bunch of fiber plates. Now how this works is the fiber plates rotate with the outside and the steels rotate with the inside. And as you release your clutch, these springs sandwich all this together so they can't turn independently. Now with soft squishy springs, they work great for soft squishy riding. They make your clutch pulls a little bit easier. Life just goes down a little smoother. However, once you get into the performance end of stuff, they just simply don't cut it. Now what happens is, between your shifts or as you're doing the clutch up, or when you're throttling up and letting the clutch out really fast, these will spin and burn instead of sandwiching together and grabbing and turning. So stiffer clutch springs not only will help improve the feel of your clutch up wheelies, but they're also going to extend the life of your clutch. And now watch what happens when you forget to dump the oil first.